Alright, so today I want to cover the 4 stages of shedding for ball pythons. And if you're not used to the shedding process in snakes, it can kind of throw you off a little bit. As a matter of fact, when I first started out, I bought some white ball pythons, some pieds and some spider pieds. I had one that was completely white, an all white snake. And the first stage of shedding is what I like to call the pink belly. And it's kind of interesting. You can actually see, especially on a white snake, you'll see almost the whole snake start turning pink. And at first you start, you're kind of wondering what in the world's going on with my snake. It's turning pink. And the first thing I did is I jumped over the internet and I was frantically searching what is wrong with my ball python. Come to find out, it's just part of the shedding process. And I would say in most cases with most ball pythons, they don't really have like a white top. They just have a white belly like this one. Most of them have like a really bright white belly on the bottom of the snake. And that is pretty much the only part that usually gets pink. And that is an indication that it's starting to go into shed. Alright, so the second phase of shedding for ball pythons is what I like to call the blue phase. And the blue phase is probably the phase that you've noticed the most. If you think your snake's going into shed, most of the times people look and say, hey, the eyes are all completely grayed out, totally blue. And a lot of times, if you have like a really bright snake that has a lot of contrast or bright colors, when they go into the blue phase, a lot of times they'll lose a lot of the colors and the contrast. As a matter of fact, I've seen a lot of people on YouTube kind of showing off their snakes and they're like, yeah, I don't want to show off the snake because it's in blue. It's in the blue phase of the shedding process, and a lot of people don't really like to show off their snakes when they're in blue. And it's pretty amazing. I actually used to have some Arizona mountain king snakes that were super bright red, really awesome snakes, and when they would go into shed, they got so browned out you couldn't even tell that they were red at all. It's pretty amazing the difference when they go into the blue phase. Alright, so the number 3 phase for shedding ball pythons is what I like to call the clear phase, and that can be a little disconcerting too if you're just starting out in ball pythons. It's kind of funny, the first thing you'll see is your snake getting pink, and you're like, what in the world's going on with my snake? And then it starts going into the blue phase. It's pretty obvious, and then all of a sudden they can go completely clear without actually shedding, and you're kind of scratching your head thinking, man, I thought this snake was going to go into shed. Where is the shed? Where did it go? And come to find out, there's actually a clear phase right before they shed, and that phase can kind of trick you too, because a lot of times you think a snake is going to shed and it doesn't actually shed until a little while later. And I haven't really timed the difference in the span between these phases in ball python shedding, but I say it's the more you actually feed a snake, the faster they will grow and the faster they will actually go through these different phases in shedding. Alright, so the 4th and final phase for ball python shedding, and that is the actual shed. They actually start losing their skin, and it usually peels off in one complete piece if you have the humidity correct. And it's kind of interesting, I actually have really big snakes like some reticulated pythons, and it seems like they never shed in one piece. Seems like the bigger the snake gets, the less likely you are to get a complete shed all in one piece, even if the humidity is correct. And this is really the time when especially right before the shed, I'd say really, especially during the clear phase, you really want to bump up the humidity so when they go into the final phase of shedding, they have probably, I'd say at least 60% humidity in the tub. You can actually keep your enclosure fairly dry and then just bump it up really high, maybe even get it as high as 100% during the final phase of shedding. I used to do that quite a bit, and then bring down the humidity. So I find kind of a lower humidity, maybe about 50 or 60% is probably ideal to prevent respiratory infections. You don't want it really high, like 100% humidity all the time. So you have to really be careful when you're getting into the final phase of shedding, especially if you get a stuck shed, and that can be really problematic. I've actually had some snakes that were kind of stuck in a shed and they didn't actually shed it out until the next shed, and you have to really be careful of that, especially if they have a little bit stuck on their eyes or some people say on the tip of the tail. Sometimes it can actually hurt the snake by keeping the stuck shed on the snake for too long, especially in the eyes, in the eye region. So if you actually come out of the final phase and you have patches of shed stuck on your snake, what you can actually do is you can put them in a higher humidity tub, something like with a coconut husk substrate, try to boost the humidity. Or what you can do is you can soak them in a little bit of water. You have to be really careful if you're soaking them in water to get a stuck shed off, because if they have something like the spider gene where they have a little bit of neurological issue, you definitely don't want them too long in the water, especially unsupervised. You don't want your snakes to actually drown in the water. You have to really be careful. And I'd say if you put them in water, probably what I do is make a water bath probably about 85 degrees, 85 to 90, kind of the hot spot for ball pythons. And then keep them in there, I'd say maybe for 10 minutes, and then pull them out. You can always do a second soak maybe later in the day and do like a double soak. All right, so I have a ball python over here that's going through a shed. This is actually my fire-pied male, and he has been fasting for a really long time, kind of freaking me out that he hasn't eaten in a few months. I'm almost tempted to go in here and feed him like a live rat crawler, just to try to get him back on food. But he's actually going through a shed. You can actually see that he still has a little bit of red up on the top from the initial phase, and then he kind of went through the blue phase. You can see his eyes are a little bit blue, just a little bit, and he's actually right on the edge of the last phase of the blue phase going into the clear phase. So he's almost completely clear compared to where he was just a couple days ago. And I would say usually they go into the clear stage, and then it's just, you know, usually just a few days before they actually shed. And at this point it's really important to get in here and make sure you have enough humidity in the tub, enough moisture in the substrate to actually help them through the shed. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And JJ asks, where do I put the probe for the thermostat to control my ambient room temperature? And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, there is quite a bit of a gradient from the bottom of the room to the top of the room when you're measuring temperature. And I found that early on when I was setting up. I have a little greenhouse thermostat hooked up to a space heater that controls the temperature in the room here. And I would say most of the time that the space heater doesn't come on a lot, because I actually have all my rodents, the live rodents down here in the room that really produce a lot of heat. You'd be surprised. I actually had a power outage that went on for a few hours, came down here in the reptile room, and it was still pretty warm from the heat from all the rodents. It's pretty amazing. But essentially what I do is I also have a fan that really circulates the air pretty aggressively here in my room, and the thermostat for the temperature control, I actually put it right in the middle of the room, pretty much 50-50 between the floor and the ceiling. And it's pretty much the same thing when you're looking at temperature probes for some of your racks, especially if you have like hatchling racks and you have a temperature gradient. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll actually put the probe right in the middle row of the rack, and it's kind of interesting. The top and the bottom will be a little bit colder than the middle of the rack. It's weird how the temperature differential kind of adjusts based on the probe placement of the thermostat. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.